What happens when silence becomes too heavy to carry? When the glitz of fame hides the darkest truths? In this gripping investigation, a voice long buried in fear rises to shatter one of Hollywood's most untouchable legacies. It's a story of power, manipulation, and the brutal cost of staying quiet. The courtroom is ready. The names are real. And what you're about to hear was never meant to surface. Subscribe to Hollywood Courtroom, where we uncover the stories others won't touch. No spin. No filters. Just raw, documented truth from behind the velvet curtain. Your curiosity brought you here. The truth will keep you. Day 18 of The People vs. Sean Diddy Combs was expected to be mundane. A procedural lineup of financial analysts, digital forensics experts, and yet another paralegal with itemized bank statements. The media attendance had dwindled. The gallery, once filled wall to wall with reporters and curious spectators, now sat half empty. Even the judge, the normally sharp-eyed and fast-speaking Robert Mendez, had the faint look of someone resigned to a tedious day of ledgers and chain of custody declarations. That expectation shattered at precisely 10:47 a.m. As the prosecutor shuffled papers at the lectern, she paused, took a controlled breath, and said, "Your Honor, the people call Kira Montrose to the stand." Silence fell with such force it felt physical. Even the clicking of courtroom keyboards halted. The gallery turned as one, lawyers, journalists, bailiffs, even the court artist froze mid-sketch. Diddy stiffened in his seat. His attorneys shot quick glances at each other, then to him, as if unsure whether they had heard correctly. Kira Montrose. No public indication. No press release. No leaked name on any list. The courtroom hadn't prepared for her, and from the stunned expression on Diddy's face, neither had he. She emerged through the double doors at the rear of the courtroom, flanked by two federal marshals. Her frame was slender, her posture rigid with tension but not weakness. She wore no makeup. Her dark blazer swallowed her arms. Her auburn hair, loosely pinned back, shimmered slightly beneath the courtroom lights. There was something ghostly about her, as if she had walked out of the shadows of a forgotten past. Diddy stared. He didn't blink. For the first time since the trial began, the ever-composed mogul appeared shaken. Kira approached the witness stand with deliberate, unhurried steps. Each footfall echoed with surreal clarity in the wood-paneled room. She didn't look toward the defense table. Not once. Her eyes remained fixed ahead, on the judge, on the stand, on something unseen but burning in her memory. When she took her seat and was sworn in, her voice didn't waver. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." Her hands, folded tightly in her lap, trembled only slightly. "Ms. Montrose," the prosecutor began gently, her tone cautious, almost reverent, "thank you for being here today. We understand this was not an easy decision." Kira nodded once. Her voice, when it came, was steady and low. "I'm here because I have no other choice." The room leaned in. The judge adjusted in his seat. Diddy's attorneys whispered rapidly, but he ignored them, his focus entirely on her. His jaw clenched. His lips parted, then shut again. "I've stayed silent for years," she continued, her words measured, "because silence was safer. Because I was made to believe that speaking out would destroy me. And for a while, it did. It broke me from the inside out." She paused, inhaling deeply. Her breath caught slightly at the top. "But when I saw what this case was becoming, when I saw the names of the women stepping forward, the ones who did not survive what I did, the ones still carrying it, I couldn't stay buried anymore." The prosecutor stepped closer. "Ms. Montrose, have you ever met the defendant, Mr. Combs?" "Yes," she said. "More than once. But the first time was in 2015. On a private island. At a party I wasn't supposed to remember." The ripple through the room was palpable. The courtroom, once again, felt electric. "Can you explain what you mean by that?" I was invited to an exclusive modeling retreat. That's what the message said. I was 19. New to the industry. Hungry, naive. The invite came through a casting agent I'd only met once. It was vague, but promising. Private jet. Confidentiality agreements. No press. Just opportunity. The prosecutor nodded slowly, encouraging her to go on. When I landed, Kira said, I had my phone taken from me immediately. We were driven to a dock. No one spoke much. Then we boarded a yacht, then arrived on an island. A place I would later realize belonged to Jeffrey Epstein. A cold wave swept through the gallery. And that's when I met him. Diddy. She said the name like a bullet. He wasn't there as a guest. He was running things. Giving orders to the staff. Coordinating people's movements. He had a list. A clipboard. I remember thinking, why does a music producer care where I sleep? She didn't look at Diddy, but he looked at her, eyes narrowed, teeth slightly clenched. They called it a networking weekend. But it wasn't that. There were parties. Drugs. Rooms with cameras. Girls who were far younger than me. Girls who looked lost. Kira's voice cracked then, barely, but she swallowed it. That first night, she said, he sat beside Epstein like they'd been planning it for weeks. They laughed. They watched. And at one point, Diddy walked a girl out of the room by the wrist like she was a piece of luggage. The prosecutor remained quiet. The court reporter's keys clacked like distant gunfire. The judge didn't move. Diddy's lawyers no longer whispered. I didn't say anything then. I signed what they gave me. I took the money. I left. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. But it never left me. The judge cleared his throat. Please continue, Ms. Montrose. I received monthly deposits from a shell company after that trip. For modeling expenses. I never worked for them. But the payments kept coming. Along with emails reminding me of the NDA. She turned slightly, facing the jury now. I convinced myself it didn't happen the way I remembered it. That I was imagining things. That I was crazy. Until I saw the Cassie video. Until I read those other women's statements. And then I knew. I wasn't crazy. I was just conditioned to doubt my own memory. Diddy finally moved. He looked down at his hands, twisting the silver ring on his finger. For the first time, he seemed small. Kira returned her gaze to the prosecutor. That's why I'm here. Because the same man I met on that island is sitting right there, pretending to be someone else. And with that, she stopped speaking. The silence that followed was unbearable. Sacred. Then the judge exhaled. Let the record show that witness testimony is in session. Court will recess for 10 minutes. The gavel fell, but no one moved. Diddy stared blankly ahead. And Kira Montrose remained still, her hands no longer trembling. Kira Montrose sat on the witness stand like a ghost conjured from the past, speaking in a voice too calm for what it carried. The courtroom was gripped, held in place by each word that cut the air with surgical precision. She hadn't looked at Diddy once since the testimony began, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. His face was unreadable, somewhere between contempt and quiet panic. The prosecutor approached the bench again with the next question. Ms. Montrose, you mentioned meeting Mr. Combs in 2015 on an island associated with Jeffrey Epstein. Can you walk the court through what happened before you arrived there? Kira nodded. I was 19. I just signed with a small modeling agency in Miami. Nothing big. Catalog work, local commercials. I wasn't famous. Not even close. So when my agent forwarded me a private invitation, I thought it was a break. She paused to let that irony hang. The email said I'd been selected for an exclusive weekend retreat hosted by entertainment executives and philanthropists. It promised opportunities, mentorship, and press-free networking. The language was carefully vague but dressed in power. Did anyone mention Mr. Combs specifically? No, Kira said. Not by name. But the subject line said, exclusive industry weekend, hosted by elite patrons. That word, elite, it was everywhere. The prosecutor nodded. Go on. Kira's eyes lost focus for a moment, looking past the courtroom, into a space none of them could follow. When I arrived at the private terminal, everything was pristine, white walls, fresh fruit platters, men in suits with earpieces. I was asked to hand over my phone for security reasons. I hesitated. The man smiled and said, standard protocol, Mississippi. Nothing leaves the island that shouldn't. A quiet murmur rippled through the gallery. We boarded a jet. All women. 8 of us. Ages ranged from 18 to maybe 23. Most were Eastern European or Latina. No one talked much. The flight attendants were polite but cold. After landing, we were driven straight to a dock and onto a yacht. That's when I started realizing, this wasn't what I thought it was. What made you suspicious? Kira leaned forward slightly. No one ever said where we were going. Not once. No signs. No itinerary. Just smiles and silence. And when we reached the island, it wasn't a resort. It was a fortress. Surveillance cameras on palm trees. Armed guards in polo shirts. Villas spaced out just enough to isolate each of us. The prosecutor's tone remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. When did you first see Mr. Combs? The second day, Kira said. He wasn't there when we arrived. That first night, we were kept in a welcome house, a villa with locked doors and tinted windows. In the morning, we were each assigned individual staff. Mine was a woman named Lila who never gave me her last name. She did my makeup. Brought me a dress. Told me to look polished. Said we were attending a strategic brunch. Kira swallowed before continuing. When I stepped onto the patio, Diddy was already there. Laughing. Shaking hands. Wearing a white linen shirt like he was some kind of movie producer on vacation. Except he wasn't a guest. He was in charge. The prosecutor took a step closer. Can you clarify what you mean by that? He gave orders. Told staff where to seat people. Checked clipboards. Knew every girl's name, before we introduced ourselves. He wasn't hosting, he was managing. Coordinating. Epstein was there too, sitting near the pool with 2 other men I didn't recognize. They didn't speak much. Just watched. The gallery remained frozen, as if collectively holding its breath. There was a camera set up behind a large umbrella, Kira said. Disguised, but not well. I noticed it moved slowly when I walked. I mentioned it to Lila later, and she told me, don't worry, it's for security. But I'd been on photo shoots. I knew the difference. The prosecutor placed a printed image on the screen. Do you recognize this location? Kira nodded. That's the marble gazebo near the south lawn. They called it the reflection circle. It's where they took us before the first night's dinner. They said it was to set intentions, but it felt more like a screening. Screening? Yes. Diddy stood there with 2 men and asked us questions. Casual at first, where we're from, who discovered us, what we think of ambition. Then it got strange. He asked if we were comfortable with older men. If we'd ever done nude editorial work. If we were loyal. Loyal to what? The prosecutor asked. To him, Kira replied. Or to the lifestyle. He phrased it like a test. I didn't know what to say. I laughed awkwardly and said I was just excited to be there. He nodded, like I passed. Diddy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney leaned in to whisper, but he waved the man off. What happened that evening? They hosted what they called a fireside social. Drinks were poured endlessly. Staff brought trays with pills I didn't recognize. Girls started disappearing into private cabanas. Music played louder than necessary, probably to muffle sounds. I stayed seated most of the time. I didn't drink. Something felt off. Diddy walked by at one point and said, "You're wasting an opportunity, sweetheart. This is where careers are made." Her hands had begun to tremble again. She folded them tightly to hide it. I didn't leave my room the next morning. Someone had slipped a memory card under my door. No note. No explanation. I was too afraid to look at it then. I still have it. And I've given it to the prosecution. There was a sharp inhalation in the back row. Did you attempt to leave the island? No. You couldn't just leave. There were no scheduled boats, no return flights without authorization. I stayed quiet. Smiled when spoken to. Took the money. Got home. Burned the dress. Blocked the number. Kira's voice faltered for a beat. But it never stopped. 2 months later, I got an envelope, no return address. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note that said, "Stay bright. Stay quiet." I'd never cashed it. But I got another the next month. And the next. She turned toward the jury, her voice sharpening. They don't threaten you with guns. They threaten you with silence. With shame. With the fear that no one will believe you, especially when the man in question has a net worth with 9 zeros and a team of lawyers trained to erase girls like me. The judge looked up slowly. "Ms. Montrose, do you need a moment?" "No, Your Honor," she said firmly. "I've waited 10 years to say this out loud. I'm not stopping now." The prosecutor gave her a moment before asking, "And was Mr. Combs present during the other nights of the retreat?" "Yes," Kira said. "Every night. Always smiling. Always watching. Like it was his empire, and we were disposable tenants." She looked down for the first time. I didn't know then that what happened on that island wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The courtroom remained absolutely still. The judge cleared his throat. "We'll take a 15-minute recess." But the tension didn't move with the people. It stayed where Kira sat. In her eyes. In her voice. And in the place where silence had finally broken. When court resumed, the air was different. Denser. The judge's robe seemed heavier, the walls closer. Even the reporters, usually furiously typing every soundbite, sat frozen for several seconds after Kira Montrose returned to the stand. They were afraid of missing something. Everyone was. "Ms. Montrose," the prosecutor resumed, her voice careful, "after returning from that island in 2015, what happened in the weeks and months that followed?" Kira's gaze drifted to a fixed point on the wall, as if steadying herself against it. "At first, I tried to forget. I buried it under work, auditions, photo shoots, castings that led nowhere. But it wasn't over. 2 weeks later, a payment showed up in my account from a name I didn't recognize. $5,000. The memo just said, consulting." She took a breath. Then the messages started. What kind of messages? Encrypted emails. From a sender calling themselves Verity Trust LLC. Same format every time. Polite tone. Gentle reminders that confidentiality was not optional. Once it said, "Your participation in past events binds you to ongoing agreements. Any breach would constitute reputational and legal consequences." The prosecutor paused. "Were these threats?" "Not directly," Kira replied. But the message was clear. I wasn't allowed to talk. Not about the island. Not about Diddy. Not about anyone I saw there. She shifted in her seat. I still didn't say anything. I didn't even tell my therapist. I tried to move on. The courtroom was hushed, except for the occasional creak of leather chairs and the soft rustle of legal pads. But it followed me. In rooms I didn't know were being watched. In castings that suddenly disappeared after I mentioned certain names. In men I dated who dropped me when I asked too many questions. When did things begin to unravel? The prosecutor asked. Kira hesitated. Late 2019. I had a campaign booked with a mid-level brand. Big deal for me. I gave a live interview, just fluff, fashion questions, but the host joked that I had a mysterious past. I laughed it off. She leaned forward slightly. 2 days later, the campaign was cancelled. They cited a breach of moral alignment policy. I never said anything wrong. But someone made a call. I knew it. The prosecutor nodded grimly. What happened next? I began spiraling. The payments stopped, and the silence turned hostile. I started receiving anonymous messages, photos of me on that island, stills I didn't know had been taken. I was in the background, blurry, but recognizable. A few jurors shifted uncomfortably. One email said, "You were paid to disappear. Stay gone." Another came with a clip, 30 seconds, no sound. It was me sitting in a cabana, Epstein to my right, Diddy across from me. We weren't talking. We weren't even looking at each other. But the implication was loud. Kira's hands clenched in her lap. That was the first time I felt truly trapped. Did you reach out to law enforcement? She shook her head. Not yet. I didn't believe anyone would care. Not about me. I wasn't famous. I wasn't powerful. I was a footnote in someone else's story. The prosecutor approached slowly. Did things escalate? Kira's face darkened. Yes. In 2021, I overdosed. Not a suicide attempt, officially. Just a cocktail of anti-anxiety meds, alcohol, and something I didn't remember taking. My roommate found me passed out on the floor. She straightened herself. I spent 6 weeks in a psychiatric facility. It was there that I started writing again, journaling, mostly. Every detail I could remember. Not just the island, but everything after. I began connecting dots I hadn't wanted to see. Did you speak to anyone while you were there? There was a nurse, Kira said. She asked me one night, off the record, if someone had ever tried to erase me. That's how she put it. It stuck with me. I didn't answer. But I didn't forget. And when did you finally decide to come forward? Kira took a deep breath. November 2023. I saw Cassie Ventura's lawsuit. I read every word. The surveillance. The rage. The pills. The rewards and punishments. It was the exact pattern. Not similar, identical. She paused, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. I couldn't breathe for hours. I stayed in the bathtub until the water turned cold. My hands were shaking. My chest was tight. Because everything she described, I had lived it too. The gallery was stone still. The judge sat completely upright now. Diddy remained expressionless, staring forward like a statue carved by panic. I reached out to Cassie, Kira continued. Not publicly. I found a way to contact her quietly. I didn't say much. Just, I believe you. You're not alone, she responded with 3 words, I thought I was, that broke me. The prosecutor returned to the lectern and clicked to the next exhibit on the court monitor, a series of payments made from an LLC linked to a Diddy-affiliated entertainment shell company. The names were anonymized, but one account was traced back to Kira's address. Ms. Montrose, do you recognize these payments? Yes, she said. Those were the monthly hush checks. I never spent most of them. I kept them as proof. The prosecutor turned back. What was your greatest fear in coming forward? Kira's answer came without hesitation. Being erased. Again. But this time, in public. I knew what they'd say, that I wanted attention, that I was broke, bitter, unstable. But I'd already lived in silence for almost a decade. And silence was worse. What made you believe now was the time? Kira stared straight at the jury. Because every story like mine that goes unspoken makes another one happen. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because someone has to say it out loud. The prosecutor gave her a slow, respectful nod. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. As she stepped back, the courtroom remained quiet, thick with shock and tension. The defense team didn't rise immediately. Diddy's lead attorney was frozen, blinking slowly, as if recalibrating his entire strategy in real time. The judge finally broke the silence. Cross-examination after lunch. We'll recess for 1 hour. He struck the gavel once. Kira didn't move. She sat still, breathing like someone who had just climbed out of a grave and wasn't sure yet if she'd made it. And behind her, the gallery buzzed, not with noise, but with reckoning. The courtroom returned from lunch with a palpable shift in energy. The temperature hadn't changed, but everything felt hotter, eyes sharper, nerves tighter. No one had expected Kira Montrose's testimony to cut so deeply. No one had expected her to still be sitting there. But she was. Back on the stand, hands folded, spine straight. Her composure wasn't perfect, it wasn't supposed to be. Her rawness was its own kind of authority now. She had become the heartbeat of the trial. Diddy sat expressionless, but something behind his stillness had cracked. His fingers tapped at invisible rhythms. He wasn't whispering to his lawyers anymore. The judge gave a nod. Defense may proceed with cross-examination. Diddy's lead attorney, Royce Campbell, stood slowly. He had the look of a man walking a minefield in tailored shoes. His voice came calm, rehearsed. Ms. Montrose, thank you for being here today. I understand this is difficult. Kira said nothing. He continued. You've given an emotional account of events that, to date, have not been independently verified. Would you agree that your memory of these events may have been influenced by media coverage, recent allegations, or your own personal health struggles? Kira tilted her head slightly. No, she replied. What happened to me happened long before the headlines. Royce offered a tight smile. But you've read the headlines. You're familiar with the lawsuits, the online conversations, the cultural shift in how we view past events. Of course I am, she said. I live in the same world you do. And do you agree that memories, especially under trauma, can be unreliable? I agree that trauma makes it hard to speak, Kira said evenly. But I've spent 10 years remembering every second I was told to forget. Royce nodded, pretending to jot something down. You've said that you received money, monthly payments, for several years. That you were paid to stay silent. Yes. And yet you never reported this to the police. No. You didn't alert the press. No. You didn't even consult an attorney until this year. Correct. He turned, lifting a paper from the defense table. I have here a post from your now-deleted Instagram account, dated February 2017, showing you vacationing in Tulum. Captioned, and I quote, "Sunsets remind me that I'm still free, doesn't sound like someone under duress." Kira didn't blink. You can look happy and still be in hell. He let that answer hang for a beat too long. Ms. Montrose, he said, stepping closer, you claim that Mr. Combs orchestrated events that involved multiple criminal acts, on a private island, no less. You described cameras, pills, isolation. Did you report any of this to federal authorities? No. Then why are you reporting it now? Because I watched him build an empire on other people's silence. Because I believed no one would listen, until I realized that someone had to speak first. Royce raised his eyebrows, then shifted his tone. You also claim that you were present during a gathering with Mr. Epstein, yet you cannot produce guest lists, flight records, or even a single witness to corroborate that encounter. Kira's voice stayed low. I gave you a memory card with footage from that trip. A 30-second clip of a poolside gathering, Royce said quickly. No sound. No context. No crime. And it doesn't prove your presence in any specific time or place. She inhaled sharply. You're right. It doesn't prove everything. But I'm not the only one who remembers. They're just not ready yet. Royce stepped back for a moment, regathering. Let's talk about your psychiatric record. The courtroom stiffened. You were hospitalized for overdose in 2021. You've mentioned anxiety, depression, hallucinations. How do we know your testimony isn't a product of those conditions? Because, Kira said, her voice rising for the first time, the illness was a symptom of the silence. Not the other way around. A wave of murmurs rolled through the back rows. The judge raised his hand. Quiet in the gallery. Royce's voice shifted. Softer now. Almost mocking. You've brought powerful accusations against a man with a long-standing career. You understand that a single claim like this can dismantle decades of work, relationships, businesses? Yes, Kira replied. And you're okay with that? Kira looked directly at him. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy having my trauma turned into entertainment for strangers? The only thing more humiliating than telling this story was living it in silence. She turned her head for the first time, toward Diddy. And I wasn't the only one. It was the first time since her arrival that she acknowledged him. Diddy's jaw clenched. He turned away. Royce cleared his throat, then quickly returned to his notes. Ms. Montrose, are you familiar with the name Isla Corporation? Yes, she said. That's the shell company that sent the payments. Royce lifted another exhibit. We have accounting records showing Isla Corporation has funded events, artists, and contracts across numerous entertainment ventures. Isn't it possible the money you received had nothing to do with coercion, but was simply a business retainer for image work? I never did image work for them. You accepted the money. I thought I had to. Royce hesitated, then tried the final blow. Would you describe yourself, at any point, as having consented to your participation in the island event? Kira stared at him. No. He leaned forward. But you boarded the plane. You stayed. You accepted the clothing. You drank the drinks. You signed the NDA. Yes. Then how is that not consent? Kira's face sharpened like glass. Consent given under fear, under pressure, under the threat of losing everything, isn't consent. It's survival. Royce said nothing. The silence burned like acid. No further questions, he finally said, voice clipped. The judge nodded. Redirect, Ms. Becker. The prosecutor rose. Not at this time. Kira was excused from the stand. As she stepped down, the jury watched her like something between a ghost and a lighthouse. Diddy didn't look up. And then, mid-movement, just before Kira returned to her seat, she turned back to face the court. I wasn't brave then, she said clearly. But I am now. And I hope someone watching knows that they can be, too. Then she walked down the aisle, past the cameras, past the stillness, through the storm she'd chosen to enter. And behind her, silence shattered into movement. The first juror reached for a tissue. The second wiped their cheek. A third wrote something down, fast and furious, like they didn't want to forget it. The room had fractured. And no one, especially not Diddy, could put it back together the same way again. The morning of the verdict arrived with a fog that settled over the courthouse like a warning. Reporters stood elbow to elbow behind the barriers, microphones covered in plastic against the mist, waiting for something monumental. The streets around the courthouse had been sealed since dawn. People weren't just watching now, they were waiting to witness a fall. Inside, the atmosphere was near religious. Still, reverent. Security presence had doubled. So had the weight in the room. Diddy sat at the defense table, in a crisp black suit, flanked by his attorneys who now looked more like funeral directors than legal defenders. He hadn't spoken publicly in days. The man known for endless noise, excess, celebration, was quiet. The jury filed in slowly, each step another tick of the clock. Eyes down. Jaws tight. They carried the collective look of people who had seen too much and were still carrying it. All rise, the bailiff called. The judge entered, his robe heavy with finality. We are here for the reading of the verdict in the case of the People versus Sean Diddy Combs, he said. Jury foreperson, have you reached a decision? A woman in her early 50s stood. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. Yes, Your Honor. We have. Please read the verdict. The entire room held its breath. In the matter of aggravated coercion, trafficking under duress, and conspiracy to suppress witness testimony, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. There was no eruption. No shouting. Only silence, like a collective exhale, relieved, shocked, disoriented. Diddy didn't flinch. But his attorney's shoulders dropped visibly. Behind them, the gallery erupted, not with sound, but emotion. Some cried. Others froze. One woman clutched a rosary. Kira Montrose sat in the second row. Not front and center. Not a spotlight figure. Just there. Her eyes closed the moment the word guilty was spoken. Not in triumph. In release. The judge continued, voice firm. Sentencing will be scheduled at a later date. The court recognizes the extraordinary courage shown by the victims who came forward. This case is now adjourned. The gavel hit the bench like a door closing. But nothing really ended. Outside the courthouse, the world had already shifted. News banners flashed, Diddy found guilty. Tweets, TikToks, live streams, it spread like a fire in dry brush. The empire built on silence was no longer quiet. Kira didn't address the media. She exited through a side door, escorted by two plainclothes officers. The air smelled like rain, and for the first time in a decade, she inhaled deeply. In a small, rented SUV waiting nearby, she closed the door behind her and exhaled. The silence in the vehicle was different from the one in the courtroom. It wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. Do you want to speak to the press? Her attorney asked gently. No, she replied. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He nodded. The others are watching. Some might come forward now. I know, she said. That's why I did it. As the car pulled away, the courthouse faded behind her. But she wasn't looking back. Later that week, an internal memo from one of Diddy's primary corporate sponsors leaked to the press. Effective immediately, we are severing all brand ties with Mr. Combs. We believe the voices of survivors must be honored. Silence is no longer an option. The dominoes fell quickly. Record labels pulled out. Streaming platforms paused promotion. Collaborators issued apologies. Some stayed quiet. Some panicked. A few claimed they had no idea. But Kira did. She remembered everything. At a private gathering weeks later, quiet, anonymous, no press, several women sat in a circle in a sunlit room in Queens. Some still didn't give real names. Others brought documents, photos, memories that had been collecting dust and guilt for years. Kira sat among them. She didn't lead. She didn't preach. She just listened. When one woman broke down halfway through her story, Kira placed a hand on hers. "You're not crazy," she said softly. "They just worked hard to make you think you were. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was truth." Out loud. In full color. Back in the media echo chamber, the story spiraled wider. It reached Hollywood, politics, philanthropy. A pattern began to take shape, one that couldn't be flattened into a single headline or explained away as one bad man. Diddy's defense team filed an appeal. They argued that media influence tainted the jury pool. That Kira was unstable. That everything was circumstantial. But the footage existed. The bank records existed. The pattern existed. And so did the women. On a quiet morning 2 months later, Kira received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single line. "You weren't supposed to survive. But now you can." There was no signature. She folded it once, tucked it into a folder already thick with evidence and memories, and returned to her laptop. She wasn't done speaking. She wasn't afraid anymore. That night, a podcast released an exclusive interview, not with Kira, but with another woman who had stayed silent until now. She gave only her first name. The interviewer asked, "Why now?" Her voice cracked slightly before answering, "Because I saw her do it. Because she looked right at him in court. Because I thought I was the only one. I'm not." And in the dark of that recording studio, another fracture opened. And the silence kept breaking.